gonna check out. Oh, hey. I'm just gonna turn that off for a second. Mike, still in here? Or you? Is audio gonna come out of the videos in the presentation?
Let's
find out.
Yours.
See? Yeah. Oh, that's not at all disturbing. Now what happens when you turn on your mic? Do you guys hear the awful echo, or is that just us stand? Okay. Hello out there.
Screw it, we'll do it live.
I really didn't take one. It was just a thermostat board and the Bluetooth scale that I picked up at the Apple store.
I turned it off because it sounded like that. Okay. Do you want me to keep talking so your phone can tell you things? Hello, customers out there in the YouTube land. Do you really want me to give this whole presentation sounding like a weird Madonna video?
Yes.
The audience has spoken.
I don't have a python to dance with, no weird costumes. Is that better? It sounds okay? You guys okay with the weird Madonna land? All right then.
We're coming to you live from the Bat Cave, the Southeast Linux Fest. My name is Tom Callaway. This lovely lady here is Ruth Suehle. We are going to be talking about Raspberry Pi hacks. We wrote this lovely book. God, that's weird. The echo. Plant your feet.
Plant my feet.
Don't move. We wrote this book called Raspberry Pi Hacks.
Oh, he needs the previous slide. Sorry. What do you need from us? Oh, okay. Here you go. This is us. We'll talk more about that picture at the end. Okay, let's roll. We wrote a cool book, I think.
We wrote a book called Raspberry Pi Hacks, and the point of the book was to help people figure out what to do with their $35 Raspberry Pi, because we found that lots of people had one, but hadn't really done anything with it.
Here's how we prove this. How many of you have a Pi? How many of you have done something with your Pi that is not XBMC? Wow, that is better than average. Yeah, we're usually left with like 2. One of my favorites was like, all right, what do you have? And he was controlling his big mouth Billy Bass with it. So the Pi idea came about in early 2006 by Eben Upton. He was a chip architect at Broadcom, and he got together with some other people. He was also teaching at Cambridge and saw that students who are coming in now don't have the same experience that students coming in had 20 years ago, say, or maybe even 10 years ago. They don't know as much about the hardware. They don't have as much software experience. And so the entire idea of the Pi was to give an inexpensive way to teach software and hardware skills, specifically Python, which is why it's called the Pi, to people before they get to college, so that they weren't wasting so much time when you only have theoretically 4 years to teach computer science students. And so the first alpha boards were available in August 2011. You could actually buy them in January 2012. The Model B manufacturers started shipping in April. The first run was 10,000 boards because that was all they thought they would ever sell. And they crashed both websites that were selling them that day. And now, what are we at? Like 2 million in the wild? Yeah. So highly successful. And this is what it looks like now.
This is the B plus, I think.
Oh, it tells you right there on that.
Yeah, it does. How convenient. So this is a slightly older picture because the B plus has been superseded by the Raspberry Pi 2. And in this convenient picture, you see comparison between the old B plus model and the Raspberry Pi 2.
And this just gives you a brief idea of what the difference is among the models that are available now. You can still buy the Bs and the B pluses, and they actually dropped the price of the B plus to get rid of the last few, I think. Yeah. This is what the GPIO looks like on the new Raspberry Pi 2. The first 26 pins are identical. So if you have projects, if you want to follow instructions that were, say out of our fantastic book, that were written before the Raspberry Pi 2 was released, you can still do that because those pins are identical. You just have more now.
And for those of you who don't know what GPIO is, that's the general purpose input-output, so that you can connect basically anything with wires to the Raspberry Pi. The nice thing about the Pi's flexibility on the GPIO is all of these are reconfigurable in software. So just because they have specific purposes in the environment doesn't mean that you can't then reassign them for whatever needs that you have. The one thing to keep in mind, if you've ever done GPIO work with Arduino, for example, the Arduino tends to be 5 volt and the Pi is 3.3. So you just need to keep that in mind.
And if you look at your pins and go, those aren't really labeled all that well, and I have no idea what to do with them, this is perhaps one of the most fantastic projects anybody came up with. Dr. Simon Monk has actually done a lot, not just with the Pi, but with some Arduino stuff. And if you look up Arduino books, you'll find several that he's written. I think what is happening? I think the most recent one is something like Arduino Projects for the Evil Genius or something like that. I think that's one of his. And this was one of the first things that I knew of him to have done, was that you could just go to his website and print out this handy little thing called the Raspberry Leaf, stick it on your GPIO, and not have to try to figure out what they all were all the time. If you would like to simply purchase one, Adafruit has 2 versions and they're available for all of the Pis. And if you don't know which Pi you have because it's been sitting in a drawer for the last 2 years and you don't actually remember what you bought anymore, you can just do this and it will tell you at that little revision line, the second one from the bottom. If it's a 2 through 6, it's the Model B that only had 256 meg of RAM. If it is 7 through 9, it is the Model A with 256. And if it's D through F, it's the Model B that has 512. And I actually don't know how the 2 shows up. We should run it and find out.
We should.
We actually only finally just got around to buying some 2s a month and a half ago or something. So, but like we said, the beginning of the GPIO pins, which is where all the super fun stuff happens, are still identical. So there are a few things that I'm going to show you, projects that were done originally with Raspberry Pi 2s. They've been done more recently, but for the most part, you can do everything with any of them.
Yeah, but one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're working with the Pi 2, or the Pi for that matter, is to get a good SD card. The Pi doesn't boot off of anything but the SD. It doesn't have any built-in flash. And so one of the things to remember is that SD cards are made as cheaply as humanly possible. If they could make SD cards out of vanilla wafers, they would absolutely do that. So you're going to want to try to get a good quality card. And that's not a trivial task, because if you go to your local Walgreens or CVS, you will find any number of SD cards that are sold. You can buy one that has literally the exact branding, have it be good, come back in a month, buy the exact same branding, and have it be bad.
I found 2 in my pocket. Are they good?
I'm sure they are. So what is common is you're going to see that there's a lot of cards that are micro cards that come with an adapter. That's fine. There were some very early bugs in the Raspberry Pi where because the Pi 1 used the full-size SD card slot. The Pi 2 uses the micro slot. So you no longer need the adapter, and in fact, it's actually beneficial if you had one of those micros with the adapter because you can switch it between either one of the Pis. Now, there's a pretty good community website called elinux.org. That stands for Embedded Linux. They track a whole lot of embedded Linux discussions, but they also have a ton of good material about the Raspberry Pi. And in fact, if you're looking for anything technical about the Raspberry Pi and the link is eLinux, you're probably off to a good start. So they have a list of SD cards that people are tracking to try to determine whether the cards are good or bad in whichever batch you ended up getting. Obviously, that's not foolproof, given that they rebrand them identically with the exact same serial numbers, and one is good and one is bad. But the good news is most SD cards are pretty cheap. So if one is bad, then you throw it away and you get a different one. They also don't live very long, especially if you're doing a ton of write operations to it. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about your Raspberry Pi project where you plan on mounting something in a tree to watch birds for the next 10 years, that SD card is not going to live that long.
We didn't talk much about the changes that they made for the Raspberry Pi 2, but one of the most useful is they switched from a plastic SD card slot holder to a metal one. And we had cases that we bought from, I think, Adafruit that would, when you tried to put in an SD card, would snap that plastic holder that held your SD card in. And now you can tape your SD card in. It was awful. I'm so glad they switched to metal. So now that you have an SD card, you need a distro.
Yeah. Now, there is no right answer, Pydora, but we being from Red Hat are a little bit biased. We tend to prefer the Red Hat flavor of distributions, but Raspbian is also a very, very popular distribution for the Pi. And then there's things like RaspBMC, which is a custom distribution for doing XBMC on the Pi. If you were thinking about doing XBMC on the Pi, don't waste your time trying to slap it on top of your favorite distribution. Just get something like RaspBMC and save yourself the next 2 hours of your life.
Which I believe is now called Kino. It changed names.
I think they do, yeah.
And I mention Occidentalis because I think that it has often been poorly described as an education distro, except what it really means, if you keep reading their description, is you should only use that if you're a serious hardware hacker and kind of already know what you're doing. And so I think education distro is a bit misleading.
Yeah, Occidentalis has all of the Adafruit libraries for all of their third-party components they sell for the Raspberry Pi already incorporated inside of it. So it's a great way, if you are buying things from Adafruit specifically, just going with Occidentalis as a starting point is a good base.
And if you don't like one of those, there are a few other options available, some of which are designed for very specific purposes, some of which are general distributions. elinux.org has some information on creating your own distro. If for some reason that I cannot even fathom, none of these suit your interest at all, and you have just decided that all you want to do in the world is create another Raspberry Pi distribution, good for you.
Also, get out now. We don't want to hear that question.
What you will find if you go to raspberrypi.org and want to get started is NOOBS. It stands for New Out-of-Box Software. And this is what you see when you start. And what makes this really great is if you, A, sometimes maybe do stupid things, or B, are giving it to children who definitely often do stupid things, this gives you instant restart option. You hold down Shift at boot and you get this menu again and you get a do-over. It has changed a little bit. Today, it only has the Raspbian archive actually on the image, and you need a network connection if you want any of the rest of them. But if nothing else, even if you don't have the network connection, you can at least get a do-over with Raspbian. And it's also super awesome if you are teaching a kid about Linux and you want to explain to them that there are a lot of similarities, but also some differences. You can say, hold down Shift, try another one, and you can see it immediately.
So if you're trying to install your image, you've picked whatever you want. There's a couple different ways to do it. Even if you're not using Fedora, there's a fantastic tool that the Fedora community has built to install images onto SD cards for ARM deployments. It's called the Fedora ARM installer, because if we don't put our name on it, no one will know we made it. And you can install that. It's a really simple graphical tool that allows you to basically say, this is my image file. This is the SD card I want it to go to. It writes it out and does a pretty good job. If you're trying to do this on a Mac, there's a tool called the RPI SD Card Builder or RasPiWrite. You can Google these, and there's the GitHub link for the latter. If you're on Windows, you are at the wrong conference.
Or if you go to most of the sites that sell Raspberry Pi things, you can simply buy a preloaded SD card and save yourself that whole 5 minutes of your life.
All right. Now, power is the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're working with the Raspberry Pi. The Pi wants 5 volts. No more, no less, exactly 5 volts. Now, when you are working with your Pi and you notice that it is doing weird and strange things, like your wireless keeps dropping for no good reason, or your keyboard will pretend it doesn't exist and then a whole bunch of keys will show up. These are power problems. These are not device driver problems. They're not Linux kernel problems. They are all power problems. I guarantee it. It means you do not have clean power running into that device, or the devices that you have hooked into it are drawing so much power across that you're not able to power the Pi fully. The Pi will do its best to try to stay alive when you give it less power than it needs, but things start to behave poorly. And one of the reasons is because the USB ports that are on the Pi are low power ports. They're not high power ports. Most of your devices that you see that have USB are high power ports, and most of the devices you're plugging in are high power. And the Pi will do its best to give as much power as it can to those ports, but it's almost never enough unless you are running a clean 5-volt 1-amp power line to the Pi. So Adafruit has a fantastic plug that you can buy that is 5-volt 1-amp. Bonus, that charger that runs that 5-volt 1-amp for the Pi will charge your phone faster.
Assuming you have a real phone and not an iPhone.
Well, if you've got an iPhone, I can't help you. But
Aw, you're at the wrong conference.
Get out. But and that's the thing is the charger that you get with most of your phones is remarkably cheap. It is not giving you 5 volts 1 amps, or for your tablets, they want actually more amperage than that to be able to charge. So you'll get a faster charge as a result of having the better charger. And that's a little tidbit secret if you're eager to get your phone to charge faster.
We will demonstrate probably several more times that the Pi is often tolerant of your stupidity and probably will put up with several of these things, like not enough power or powering it off your laptop's USB port or whatever. Some days it won't, and then you'll think, but yesterday it was fine. Well, you should probably figure out what's going on.
And it will be 1 in the morning on the day before the talk, and you're like, why is this not working?
That would never happen.
Never.
This is a slide out of order, but I'll tell you about it anyway. This is, I usually mention after the distros because somebody's like, can I put Android on my Pi?
Wait, I got this one. No.
It is technically possible, and I just checked in yesterday to see what was going on. They haven't updated their page at all in about 2 years.
And actually, with the Pi 2, it probably is a slightly better scenario than it used to be with the Pi 1.
Yeah, so there's just a post on their Google Groups very recently that they have an image for the Pi 2 with pre-installed KitKat on the Berry bootloader thing. You can do it. I did it one day. It is the slowest computer you will ever use in your life. Like, you move your mouse, and then you sit back, and then you watch the mouse kind of move across the screen. It is excruciatingly slow. But if that's what you need to do with your life, then you go do that with your life.
So display options. These are all the nitty gritty details that every now and then somebody wants to know. The Pi supports HDMI Rev 1.3, 1.4. The Pi 2 has 14 HDMI resolutions from 640 by 350 to 1920 by 1200, plus all the various PAL and TSC standards. These are for, all of you folks with international monitors. I'm sure all of you have one of those. It has composite video out. The Pi 1 had composite video out over a dedicated composite video out, one of the yellow plug ports. They got rid of that, and they combined it with the TRRS jack so that you can do the audio out and the video across that. You just have to have the right converter cable, so you can still do composite line out. You've just got to jump it through the right converter. There is no VGA on the Pi. There are all sorts of ways to get VGA out if you are still living in the 80s, but it doesn't have anything built onto it. There's a gentleman who is in the UK who built a lovely thing that uses up all of the GPIO pins to add a VGA outboard to it, and then realized that it was making so much noise that it would never get FCC approval. So he put all the plans for it on GitHub. So if you really want to build a fun little VGA connector for it, you can. There's also a DSI connector on there. If you've ever worked with embedded equipment, DSI is a standard connector type for screens, and the Pi has a lovely DSI connector.
There are also other things you can use besides a regular old monitor. This is one of my favorite projects, if for no other reason than to read his instructions. So even if you have no intention about using a Kindle as a display, you should just go to this blog post, and I'll post these slides later where you can get all the URLs that are in it, because he insults you the whole way. He suggests that you have a spare Kindle because you're going to do something really stupid along the way and destroy the first one. He says things like, you're going to open a terminal emulator, and he says, if you don't know what a terminal is, well, I'm not sure why you're reading this article in the first place. Like, it's a lot of fun reading, but it works out. This is the old style of Kindle, and it runs off of a little micro USB slot, and so it's perfect. This is the sort of thing that Tom was mentioning that you will try to make work right before you're talking. For some reason, it has stopped working. But this is the Motorola Atrix lap dock, which the Motorola Atrix was a super expensive phone that only was really useful for a very short period of time compared to the cost of it. And this was one of the very expensive accessories that went along with it. I think it was about $400, but you put your phone into the back of it, and then it turned it into a tiny little laptop. Now that thing is about 40 bucks on eBay, and it has an HDMI connector, and you put a Pi on the back of it, and you have a screen and a keyboard attached to it. It does, however, require what I call the magical unicorn dongle, which is, I believe, a male micro USB to female regular USB that even Fry's in California, which I thought sold everything, didn't sell. And then you have to carve out a little bit of the plastic on it. And yeah, it's a magical unicorn connector. We do have one at the Fedora booth if you would like to come by and look at it. But for whatever reason today, it has decided that it doesn't want to play with us.
They also have the laptops connected to Pis at the registration desk. So if you registered and checked in, you were actually using a laptop connected to a Pi.
I didn't register myself.
Yeah, I did that. So remember that DSI connector I brought up before that I talked about? Well, one of the first things I wanted to do was to find some sort of generic device, break it open, take the screen off of it, plug it into the Pi, voila, instant screen across the DSI connector. Sadly, it is not that simple. Really what I wanted was I wanted a touch screen, because most of the touch screens that are out there have a DSI connector, and it's really easy to attach to that. And the Pi doesn't currently have any support for any devices using the DSI connector. That would have to be added in the firmware so that they could detect the device. And the grand total of devices supported being 0 means that I had to find another way to get a touchscreen working. So I went on the internet, looked for standard touchscreens that are out there, and I found a Mimo 720, which is a little bit dated now, but at the time it was a pretty current model. And it's a display link device. And I thought, that's easy. There's USB ports, so that should be really straightforward to do. So I went to plug it in, and the Pi Linux environments didn't see it at all. And so I said, well, all right, well, what do I need to do to get this working? And so the magic things to get this working is you need to enable the either the frame buffer driver, which is the one that works the best, or the kernel mode setting driver, which is, it works, but it's a little bit more finicky. And then you can get that to work. Now, the biggest downside with doing a display link device is that the video card inside of the device is actually driving it. And it's not fast at all, nor is it 3D accelerated. So if you're planning on watching a movie, being able to take advantage of the built-in GPU optimizations that are inside the Pi, it doesn't take advantage of the GPU on the Pi at all. So it's good for a touch screen if you want to have a simple 2D display access to the Pi. But if you're trying to do anything 3D or video, it's not a good bet. Now, let's say that you want to make these changes. You want to go ahead and start building your own kernel. The good news is that they have all the kernel sources for their Linux kernel image on GitHub. Unfortunately, all of those changes have yet to be merged into the upstream Linux kernel. So we're not quite where we want to be, where we just say start with the Linux kernel sources, check these options, and you're good to go. You're still having to use their tree. But their tree is extremely straightforward. So if you do a git clone of their tree, you'll see that it is the Linux kernel with their patches and add-ons made to it. Or you can get a tarball of pre-built source at a specific version, and then you can run the make Mr. Proper command and be on your way to kernel building happiness.
And we talked a bit about power. If you're fairly new to hardware, that little silver cylinder that I circled is not the thumb holder in front of the power outlet that you hold when you plug it in, which is what apparently a lot of people think that it is, and then it snaps right off. And so if that has happened to you or happens to you in the future, that is the phrase that you Google if you decide to replace it. Your Pi will probably run without it. All it does is stabilize the DC power, but don't put your thumb there, and then you'll solve all your problems.
Now, you may have noticed that the Pi does not have an off switch or an on switch for that matter. And so that you just, when you're done with it, you just yank the power cord. Well, SD card doesn't love life that much when you're constantly pulling the power on it while it's doing write operations. So one of the things you can do is you can actually add an off switch. So circled on the diagram in the lovely picture here is the location where if you add a toggle switch with a little bit of solder, a little bit of time.
200 pins in P6.
Yep. And then all of a sudden, you've got a very simple power switch.
Well, you short them out, and then you have a power. It's not a switch.
You can put a switch on there.
You could, or you just hit it with a safety pin. It'd be all right.
This is the solution to everything. Hit it with a safety pin.
Yeah, that's why he has so many holes in him.
Ow.
Leaks all the time. If you find that you think you're having power problems and you want to test your voltage, you can verify how much power you're getting with these test points. They're marked TP1 and TP2. So if you get out your multimeter and you plug in all your peripherals for your project, everything that you want to be happening, and set your range to 20 volts. You touch the red lead to TP1, which is 5 volt, and your black lead to TP2, which is ground, and you want to be seeing at least 4.8. It has a tolerance of about 0.25, but 4.8 would be good times.
If you're seeing significantly less than that, even if it's 4.7, 4.6, that is why your wireless is working poorly.
So this shows a couple of things. One is the, I think, only remaining polyfuse on it, which if something immediately has happened, you can give it some time and the polyfuse may recover. If you've done something really terrible, it may not. But you can also test the voltage coming in on the back here, which is you use TP2, which you saw before, and then F3, which is on this side. This is the reverse side near the SD card. And that will tell you the voltage coming from the fuse.
Yeah, that's especially useful if you're powering it with a non-conventional power source like a solar panel or something else. It's really good to be able to see whether you're getting good, clean power at the right voltage in.
Now, while your Pi does not have something handy like an on-off switch, it does have some LEDs that are not just there so you can find your Pi in the dark, although I may have done that once or twice. They tell you useful things, this series of LEDs. If green is on, it means your SD card is alive, and that's a good start, and the Pi recognizes that it exists. That is an A+. Well, no, not if your Pi is not running, but it's a good start. The red one is power, and it should be solidly on. If it is not, then that is a power problem. If the orange LNK is on, that means your Ethernet's connected. If the other orange one's on, that means you're getting full duplex, and the orange 100 is on when the connection is 100 megabits per second. If your green one is blinking, this is more or less what it tells you, but different versions of the firmware have resulted in different series of blinks. And so elinux.org will tell you specifically for your Pi what your assorted blinking problems mean, specifically in that 3 through 7 blinking area.
We hope you all took notes because there will be a quiz.
And slides posted online. All right, so let's look at cool projects. First thing you're going to need is a case. And you have a lot of options for a case. You can make one. If you're Tom, you can 3D print one. And actually, probably the best cases we've had were the 3D printed ones. You can buy one. There are plenty of places to buy one. Or one time when I said this, a guy held up his case, which was the cardboard box it came in. And he had X-Actoed out all of the slots around it. And he's like, this is my case. Worked perfectly well. Although I can attest that if you have it in that case and you step on it in the floor, the GPIO still really hurt a lot. This is probably the best case we've ever found. And this is the one that Southern California Linux Expo was using on, they were running registration off their Pis a couple of years ago. And this is the case that it was in, and they gave me one. And that thing rattles around my backpack. It's fantastic. The only downside, and Cyntech is the word you can Google if you want to buy it. The only downside to it is it doesn't have slots for everything around. You can see there's no GPIO cut out on the top. I think there's a little slot on the side. So it's a little hard to get to and it screws shut. But just for a Pi that you want to plug in, that thing is awesome. You can also build them out of Legos, especially if you have children that you can steal Legos from. And so this is just a couple of cooler ones that I like that is still from the internet. This one is assortedly described as Sarbanes-Oxley compliant and meeting various other standards, the Pi workplace. Or you can just buy a Lego kit. And if you'd like to come by the Fedora booth later, I can give you my dissertation on the price of Lego bricks and how much you should be paying per brick, but this one's a bit high. Red Hat booth, Fedora booth. Well, they're next to each other. I'm sitting in the middle, okay? Well, I can't be Fedora now. I got Fedora on my slides. You don't want me to be a part of Fedora? I won't write you Fedora checks anymore. You can also 3D print all sorts of designs.
Yeah, this is a old school NES case, and it's pretty sweet because you can print it so that it has the Pi in the right orientation that the SD card for the Pi 1 is actually sticking out. Doesn't look as cool with the Pi 2 anymore because the SD card holder is underneath, but still a very, very neat idea for a case.
Thanks.
Or if you want to go even older school, you can print your. To be clear, that is an Apple II case with a Pi in it sitting on top of an Apple IIe.
This is the idea I got from Rodney, who would raise his hand and wave, because I met him in this talk like 2 years ago. Wow, that was the least enthusiastic wave in history. What he did was drill some holes in an old cutting board. This is actually 3D printed, but it's the same idea. Drill some holes in a cutting board and attach the Pi, and then you got a little handle, and you can just carry it around, which I thought was super clever. And actually, could you print me one of these? Because my kid lost her Arduino case.
You got it.
Or this one. And this is a case that is 3D printed out of this elastic polymer so that it's a little bit squishy, it's a little bit bouncy, and he's got the Pi and some power bricks in there, as well as some NeoPixels. and an accelerometer. And so it's not just a case, but he can make art with it by tracing the patterns that it takes when he throws it down the stairs. Or he can change the LED blinking patterns or do all sorts of other things with it. Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Because there will be a point in your experimentation with the Pi in which you will desperately want to be able to throw your Pi down the stairs.
Plus, everybody likes when things light up and blink, right? This is a cool little device that Broadcom came up with. It's a USB hub and Wi-Fi adapter. So like Tom mentioned, you need a powered USB hub, and this one kind of fixes your problems for you. It does have support for external power, which is sold separately from it. I think you have to actually buy the power adapter, but it is an option. And it has a Wi-Fi adapter with 8211B, G, and N, and it's a pretty handy little dongle.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out one thing that I want to reinforce that she just said. If you're using a USB hub with a Pi, use a powered one. Don't use one of the cheapo ones that we're giving out here at the conference that doesn't have a power cord.
Not we. Someone might be.
Someone might be. Actually, I have a box full of them, but I haven't given them out.
Don't use those.
But the reasoning is that you're not the power drop between each one of these connections across the hub. It will barely show up, if at all. There will be times where it will show up just long enough for the kernel driver to load, and then it can't see it anymore. So powered hub, good thing.
Or you type S, and then 5 minutes later, 20 S's go across your screen.
Yeah. That sort of thing.
But this actually solves two problems with putting your Wi-Fi and your USB hub in one thing. And so then, because especially before they put 4 ports on the Raspberry Pi 2, you're always going, I need more USB. All right, so now you got to make something with your Pi. Now that you got a case, you figured out all your hardware problems, you know what you're going to do. So now you need a project. I asked how many of you again have done XBMC or whatever it's called now? Kodi, not Kino, Kodi. That's the name of it. They have a really cool couch when they do conference booths. It's an inflatable couch. Highly recommended. You can sit there and play games on their machine. This is what a lot of people start with because it's easy and it is a perfectly fantastic first project. This is one of the comments from the old RasBMC page from this guy who's like, I don't know what I was doing, but it took me 3 minutes and now I've done it. And this guy used to be my perfect example of how easy this was for a starter project. And then we were trying to get the book finished. And I told my then 7-year-old, like, here, go do this. And I will write down what you do. And she did it. So the 7-year-old can do it. I'm pretty sure you can. Or if you need a more complicated project in your life, is Vincent here by chance? No. So there's a guy walking around this conference. I was hoping he was going to come so that I could tell this story about him while he was here. But yeah. Oh, he was just here last night. So we have a sorted mailing list at Red Hat for each of the offices. And he sent an email to our regional list one day that said, hey, anybody got a Geiger counter I could borrow over the weekend? With no context.
At Red Hat, that's a little bit of a disturbing thought.
And yet not the strangest request we've gotten over that list.
No.
And so I just messaged him on IRC since I knew him, and I was like, what you doing? And he goes, oh, great. Can you make me a Raspberry Pi Geiger counter? And I'm like, I don't think so, but I want to Google that. Oh, maybe I could. That apparently is an option. And then after the Fukushima disaster, this actually became a huge thing and really important. And some people got together and started creating these Raspberry Pi Geiger counters, which are very inexpensive. This is a module specifically made for this purpose called the Pi Guy. And the people who created this had effectively no knowledge in the relevant technical areas and managed to get this running in about 10 days. And so then what you can do is gather research, gather data, and aggregate that and get some really important information that in the case of Fukushima, they weren't getting out of the government or anyone else. Less seriously, let's talk about the Pi's actual purpose. Who knows what this thing is?
Anyone?
No? That's because you're all American. This is the BBC Micro, which came out in 1981, December of 1981. And it came out in 2 models. They were called the Model A and the Model B. That should sound pretty familiar. What is slightly different is that the Model A had a 2 megahertz processor and 16K of RAM. The B had a whopping 32K. It was blazing, but you can see my big red arrow. It was intended for education, and that was the whole, that was the motivation and inspiration for the Pi, and so that's why it's named the same way. So let's talk about some education projects. Pis are increasingly being used in education. The foundation has a Raspberry Pi Education Fund now that has been doing some good work. Google funded 15,000 Raspberry Pis to be used in schools in the UK, and that project is going really well. Madanu is a project in India and in Kenya from a startup in the UK that takes Pi education there, but instead of dropping off a bunch of hardware and hoping that some kids learn something somewhere along the way, they go in and teach all the classes and follow up and do all of that. And then there are gobs and gobs of local clubs and classes. We went to an elementary school near us where I think it was 3rd and 4th graders, the teacher had gotten a grant to buy a bunch of Pis and teach a semester-long class to the 3rd and 4th graders about doing stuff with the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, Pis run Scratch extremely well. And so they're fantastic learning platforms for students to be able to learn Scratch and then also to use it to build sweet robots.
This is another one. This is a group called Powering Potential that began with 3 schools running solar-powered Raspberry Pi labs in Tanzania because they don't have a bunch of wall outlets to go plug all their Pis into. So they have a really fascinating setup. And what they have now is 9 solar-powered systems in 91 computers in 10 schools around Tanzania, teaching 5,500 teachers and students. And they started about 2 years ago, I think, and now have 4 students who have gone on to be enrolled in college to get bachelor's degrees in computer science. And this was in 2013, but this is just after their phase 1 of getting started, the difference in the number of students who are qualifying to continue their education. Do you want to talk about the RIT class?
Sure. So one of the schools that Red Hat partners with to promote open source in general is the Rochester Institute of Technology, or RIT, in New York. And one of the things that they've created is they've created an advanced seminar course around free and open source software, specifically around the Raspberry Pi, so that each student gets a Raspberry Pi for the semester. And then they basically develop net new software that's interesting for the Raspberry Pi. They specifically focus on humanitarian free and open source software to try to write tools and games and education applications that will make the world a better place. And then they have a proper release cycle. They focus on shipping code, releasing early and often. And a semester, they release about 20 projects. And they put all of that code up on GitHub so other people can then take them and run with them.
And these are a few of the projects that have come out of the class. This one has a Python web app that displays the temperature from a USB device that it shows you in colors and you can do various things with. This is, it reminds me, if you've ever seen ThinkGeek sells the little kitty ears that use your brainwaves to do things, it reminds me of that. But it's called the NeuroPi. And it goes along with a game where you keep a leaf afloat based on basically thinking about the leaf. It's kind of crazy. Bark Tracker was the guy wanted to know if his dog was barking while he wasn't home. So that's and then it would email him. He says, it's a crude security system. The dog is barking. Tom mentioned Scratch, and this is one of my favorite books for teaching kids Scratch. And the Raspberry Pi is a great way to do that. It's called Super Scratch Programming Adventure, and it's in its 2nd version now. The way it works is the left side of each spread is a comic book, and the cat, if you're familiar with Scratch, that cat over on the middle is the mascot of Scratch, and you can make him do crazy things. The cat is in peril or something is happening to the cat. And then on the right side of the page, it teaches you how to create a program to solve the cat's problems. And at the end of the book, you've made a video game that you can play, and that's really satisfying for kids, and they have something that they have done. That's huge, more than a book that just teaches you some concepts and you don't have anything to show for it at the end. There's also, if you have kids who are slightly older, there's a great book. This is by No Starch Press. There's one they have called Python for Kids and several others in that series that are really great. And then once you or your child that you are teaching has created awesome things, you can go store.raspberrypi.com is powered by Indie City. And so it lets you share your stuff. You can put a price on it if you want to be selling it. But this is also a good way to sort of give kids some internet skills, because it works like a lot of other places do, where it tells you a little bit about the content. Like it'll tell you what the violence is, or whether there's one I saw that was good for people with hearing problems, and it shows that in the icons in our content rating. And then it tells you the license. And so that gives you an opportunity to talk to kids about various licenses. Mysteriously, this one has marked custom agreement, and all it is GPL. I don't know how that is custom. And it's Chocolate Doom, and I like that name. There's another great one called Google Coder, and that's actually what's on the SD card that I pulled out of my pocket. This you install on your Raspberry Pi, and it turns your Pi into sort of a web server, and then you open up Chrome on your laptop or whatever and go to coder.local. And this is what you see initially. And Gadgetoid is sort of like the old Asteroids game, and I'll show you a picture of that. Eyeball is the thing where you have an eyeball that follows your mouse around the screen, and Hello Coder gives you an introduction to all the sections of Google Coder. But what Google Coder does is teach you basic HTML and JavaScript and Node.js and CSS. And the plus one is where you can just start from scratch and create your own. So you can go into, this is Gadgetoid, and you can see this, and you can start with, well, I'll edit some variables. I want to see 10 rocks, and I want to name my ship something, and I want to make them faster. And you can see how editing variables works. And then you can go to the next level, and you can see all of the code and change more things. Or you can start from scratch and do whatever you want. And now there's a section called Coder Projects where people share things that they've done, or you can go download these and look at the code. The little colored squares is a music project. There's a penguin game. The bottom left is a thing to help you make your own webcomic. And the peanut butter and jelly sandwich is a recipe system that I thought of when you were talking about your kitchen scale. Yeah, and these are just a few resources if you would like to get more involved with the pies in education. There are curriculum materials online. There are ideas about what projects you should be doing with kids if you have a whole classroom of kids versus one kid. This is the first thing I wanted to make, though, and now is the part where we talk about fun stuff instead of serious things like Geiger counters and teaching children things. I looked at that thing and I said, I have 2 Game Boys at home. I think I could gut one and cram a Raspberry Pi in there. It was slightly more complicated than I thought. But what this does demonstrate rather well is I mentioned that the Pi is often tolerant of your stupidity, and the Pi was highly tolerant of my stupidity. This is a little TFT screen that we bought from Adafruit a long, long time ago now, like 2 years ago now, I don't know. And at the time, now it's well documented. At the time, there was no schematic, no information. It was, here's your screen. Good luck with that. Have a nice day. And as you can see, I am using the highly technical method of connecting to the GPIO, which is itty bitty alligator clips. And I stood over it to make sure nothing was touching anything else. And I played Tetris on it for a while. It turns out now that that screen actually requires 12 volts and not whatever power it can suck out of the GPIO. Pi is tolerant of your stupidity.
Requires is such a loose word.
Yeah, but I like finger quotes. They're very helpful. Many people have since gone on to accomplish this, and this is the gutted version, but he actually has crammed it all in there. There are many Pis out there. But we like to play video games with our Pis. Actually, we just like to play video games, don't we? Yeah. So I thought I'd show you a whole bunch more ways that you could be playing video games besides trying to cram all that back into a itty-bitty Game Boy case. This one, oh, sorry, this isn't actually for playing games. This is for dressing up like you're playing games, if you're familiar with Fallout. This guy looked at the Pi and said, that would go on my arm. I don't think it would go on my arm because I have itty-bitty bird arms, but it would go on a normal adult person's arm. And so he built it, and it was awesome, and then it broke the night of his Halloween party, which makes me very sad. But he does have instructions on how he built the whole thing if you too would like to dress up in a Fallout costume. And I didn't realize, like, we gave this presentation for a really long time before in the middle of a talk one day, I realized that was a vodka bottle and not a beer bottle. And now all of you noticed too.
So I love the games that I grew up with a lot more than I love a lot of the games that are coming out now. So one of the things I wanted to do with the Pi was to really run emulators on it, to be able to emulate old school games on the platforms that I grew up with. And because it's a lot easier than paying the money to get a Super Nintendo off of eBay. So the Pi does a fantastic job of emulating. It can emulate all the way up to the PlayStation 2 reasonably well for most games. And part of that is that there's a lot of really insanely smart people in the emulator community that have written ARM-optimized versions of the emulators for the Pi. So if you are looking for games, I cannot help you. And but the emulators are all out there. They're all open source. They're pretty straightforward. There's a couple of distributions like PiMame that are specifically around emulating old arcade machines that have a lot of the other emulators combined into it. Some of the BMC distributions have that in there, but it's pretty straightforward, and there's a lot of really cool things you can do. There's a lot of people that are taking the old controllers, converting them to USB joysticks, and then you can plug them in and get that full experience.
So here are a few of them. This is an itty bitty one. If you see the not a banana, but a lighter for scale. This actually requires that you cut the Pi up and cram it into this itty bitty case. This is the diagrams he gives on his website to teach you how to do it. So I love that he shares. More people should share in the napkin fashion.
Besides, what good is a project if it doesn't include a step that says cut here carefully?
This is my favorite. I call it the Pizza Hut table because that's the only place I ever used to see them, where you have the table that switches back and forth. IKEA is the land of materials for this project. This is a newer one that lights up. Oh, hello. The echo came back. This is the Cupcade if you were lazy and would just like to pay Adafruit $120 to mail you a kit so that you can do this. And this is something newer. This is slightly advertised a Steam box on the Pi. What they're actually doing is using NVIDIA's game stream to stream PC games, as long as you happen to have an NVIDIA GTX 600 or better graphics card and the GeForce Experience installed. And so basically they're using it instead of an NVIDIA Shield. And if you go watch the whole video, I mean, it actually is pretty cool, but if you watch the whole video, periodically they say things like, people are watching this and going, that costs $35 and I have to use the command line, or I could just pay $50 for the one from Steam. Okay. But it is an option, because sometimes you just build things because you wanted to build them and not because it was actually a good idea. We have built many things that weren't actually a good idea.
Yeah, there's the internet is full of people who have built things out of Raspberry Pis that are not a good idea.
This guy. So how many of you had this toy when you were a little kid? Yeah, or you've at least seen one in Toy Story, and the thing's a little bit creepy, right? This is what it looks like when you gut it and cram a Raspberry Pi in it.
I like the eyes.
Yeah, and so as I mentioned, it's a little creepy. So what this does, it's the Fisher-Price Chatter telephone, and he turned it into a smartphone. He actually did a lot of this work with Google Coder, which I showed you earlier. And it does an assortment of things. It uses all the original buttons on the phone, and it's connected to Twitter and Rotten Tomatoes and the weather, and will tell him all sorts of things. It does push notifications when he leaves the office, and says in a really creepy voice that he's left Sunshine Academy or whatever the thing is, and we'll play NPR or BBC stream. So I'm really hoping that were you guys able to hear the other video? No? Okay, so I'm really hoping that you can hear this because it's super creepy.
For a short-term forecast, dial 1. For the longer-term outlook, dial 3. This lady's got the details.
The longer-term forecast is light rain starting to...
Yeah, that's not how I want to get my weather. I like this guy. I'm going to hang out with him instead. I'm going to hang out with this guy and the guy with the vodka and the Pip-Boy. So he looked at the Pi and said, I really like Back to the Future, and put together a flux capacitor. And yeah, not sure it's actually what we would describe as functional, and yet still really cool, because we all like things that light up, right? In more practical projects, many people have put the Pi to use for home automation projects. And this one, what made me laugh when I found this one is it was actually inspired by the same purpose as the kid at RIT, where this guy he bought a new dog, and he was really sad that he was home all the time. So he wanted to check in on his dog and find out when the dog was barking.
My favorite part of the home automation diagram here is the dog poop mapper, where he literally straps a sensor to the dog's collar to detect when the dog is doing this business.
He does track the dog's location with GPS on Google Maps and maps where he poops. He also gets notifications for all the house events, the washer and dryer, when the fire alarm goes off, if there's a water leak, doors and sensors, window sensors, the whole deal. And it connects through Arduinos and a piece of software called openhab.org that runs on the Pi. But this is the app that he interfaces with, which is pretty cool. I, however, really like this guy's version of home automation, which actually has all of the appropriate sounds, because I like Star Trek. So if I'm going to automate my house, I want to feel like I live in the future. Also, I don't have a dog. Yeah, like Windows 95, you could like put up your wallpaper so that you kind of felt like you had an LCARS interface, but it didn't actually do anything. Not awesome.
Windows 95 didn't actually do anything.
If I'm going to automate my house, I would also like to automate the appearance of coffee before me. The only shortcoming in this project is that while he can dial up his coffee, making a coffee, and then it goes off and makes a coffee, it does not pick up the coffee glass and deliver it to me. And I feel that's really a shortcoming in this project.
I think that would involve a lot of burns in the testing phase.
At the end of the day, though, I need my Raspberry Pi to bring me a beer, or at least monitor the homebrew. Are any of you homebrewers? Anyone? Okay, so those three of you. This is a super cool system. It keeps the temperature stable in your refrigerator to within 0.1 degrees Celsius. And so then you can even set up a system over the time of your brew. For those of you who are not homebrewers, yeast is really sensitive, especially to sudden changes in temperature. And so just instantly changing, I'll just for a while and it'll warm up. So you can give it a whole temperature profile. You can say my yeast is starting, and so I wanted it to spend 36 hours at 20 degrees Celsius. And then you can say, oh, no, fermentation slowed down. I'm going to drop it to 17 degrees for 3 days. And then you can say slowly raise it back up to 2 over the next 5 days. And then you can give it a cold crash at the end. It's a great system. Who mentioned you had the a la mode? So this is the a la mode. This is was a lot more useful when there was less of a community built up around Raspberry Pi, because what this does is help you attach all of those Arduino shields that you already had in your drawer to your Raspberry Pi, and it's called a la mode. There are other ones that are called less clever things like Arduino on your Raspberry Pi. And that's what it looks like when you attach the shield, and it just goes all straight down through those handy-dandy GPIO. This is the thing over there by the wall that I do not know why it's not working. Do we know why it's not working? Nothing is working today is. Again, Rodney, who doesn't like to raise his hand, put that together for us. And it does things. That specifically only controls 4 and does not do this, but you could, theoretically. Well, if you heard sound, you would hear the Star Wars music right now, and it would be awesome. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, that's what would happen. And you could enhance your Christmas light experience with a project called Pi-FM.
Yeah, so essentially some very clever people figured out that by modulating the frequency of the actual chip inside of the Raspberry Pi, they could turn the Pi into an FM transmitter. Basically by adding a wire to one of the GPIO pins.
Very small local one. You actually only have to add the wire if you would like to expand it to. It's about 50 meters. It's not broadcasting far.
Yeah. And it is important that we note here that this may or may not be legal in your jurisdiction. And we do not wish to make any of the local amateur radio enthusiasts angry in any meaningful way. So, but if you wanted to turn your Pi into a neat little broadcaster, say you're in real estate and you want to be able to have people drive by a house that's for sale and see and hear a little message about what the house has in it, then this is a fantastic way to do that.
That sounds practical and not like a way to annoy your neighbors.
I'm sorry. You should hide one of these in their house and tune it to their favorite radio station so it overpowers it so that you can insert subliminal messages into their brain.
Never, because this guy created this functional R2 unit. But it is bilingual. It accepts commands in English and Japanese and plays videos and does all of the sorts of things that you would expect an R2 unit to do. And the reason I call it the best Valentine ever is because then his girlfriend became his wife. And so clearly it worked. If only he would bring me coffee.
Also, she keeps threatening to replace me without it working. So. This is FishPi, and the people who are working on the FishPi project wanted to be able to send their Raspberry Pi out to gather scientific data, and knew that they would have to build the most complicated, advanced, technologically waterproof boat that they could. Okay, it's a Tupperware container attached to a small plastic boat, but the idea is sound, and they were able to use this approach to basically send out a Pi into the ocean and get a lot of. Oh, haven't done it yet?
No, so the project had a little lull, like projects sometimes. The goal is to get it across the Atlantic unaided, which is a lofty goal. And they have just now gotten back together and gone, this is the year. 2015 is the year for the fish pie. But if you would like to build something waterproof, and Tupperware is not the sort of thing you like to do, and you are Tom.
You go hardcore.
That is, in fact, pie and water.
Yes. So you just throw your Pi in a bucket of water. And no, I'm kidding. You can't actually do that. That'll short out. But what you can do is you can get paint from your local hardware store, like your Home Depot or your Lowe's, called Never Wet. 3M made the paint. Rust-Oleum resells it. If you go to the website for this paint, it talks about how hydrophobic it is and how it actually repels water from it. And then in the FAQ, the first question is can I do this to electronics? And they say no. Don't let that stop you.
If you do any of you have our book? Does it not frequently say this is a dumb idea, but you should probably do it anyway? Variations on that theme. Yeah. And you may visit the booth later and yell at Tom about vertical video. That is an option.
That was the alternate title of our book, which was this is a dumb idea, but you should do it anyway.
Yeah, they talked us into that whole hacks thing. There are many awesome projects which take advantage of this cool thing. Your Pi has a dedicated little port on it intended for this itty-bitty camera. It's about an inch-ish or so. And the thing under it is a blue filter that comes with a version called the Pi Noir, which I will tell you about in a moment. But it is a fantastic little 5 megapixel camera that will take 1080p H.264 video at 2430 frames per second, I think. And we have used it for many fun projects. This is actually the first thing we built with the Pi. The
very first thing that we built with the Pi was a photo booth where you could come to our booth, for the Fedora booth, and you could get your picture taken with Tux. we had the camera set up on the remote with the Pi on the monitor, and so we would hit enter. It would take a picture. It would apply that picture to some image editing scripts that we wrote that will size it right, put an outlet, put a Fedora logo on it, upload it to the web. You can give them one of those QR codes so that they could get their picture later. And then everyone pointed out that they could have just taken a picture with their cell phone, and we felt dumb. But
that did not stop a whole bunch of people from coming to that booth repeatedly, though.
But everybody loved hanging out with Tux. Both of us are in this picture right now. I'm the guy in the Tux costume.
That's the result. You would get that, preferably looking less like an angry Snape. This is me in a funny suit, because that's what we do.
We trade.
I build a lot of costumes. Some of them are sewn, some of them are made out of foam, some of them are stranger than others. And so one of the things that I really wanted to do was come up with a way to get the Raspberry Pi into a costume that actually required the Raspberry Pi, that needed more than just an Arduino, because lots and lots of costumes have Arduinos making things blink or something. Something that genuinely required the Raspberry Pi. And we do have one project in the book about how you can use that same little TFT screen I showed you to make a sort of I got shot through effect. It's the same idea of how they make invisible things by having the camera facing backwards and the screen facing forward. So you're seeing whatever's behind me and it looks like somebody shot through, and yet I magically still walk. But this is Soundwave. Soundwave transformer, yeah? Nods of recognition. Wow, you guys have lunch comas. And so Soundwave has one Raspberry Pi in the helmet and runs an LED scroll across the front that could say, "Welcome to Southeast Linux Fest," or "Can rain little dots," or whatever you would like it to do. But the cool part is in the chest, and you can see that little kid who is staring at my chest like little kids do, because it does three things. There are two buttons that are a little hard to see on the left side. There's a yellow one and a black one under the yellow stripes. And if you push the yellow one, it plays a series of Transformers music videos, which is a thing on the internet. And we just loaded those in there. And the black one plays the feed from the camera, which you can kind of see. It's blacked out above the yellow stripes. And so you can take a picture of Soundwave with a picture of you on it. It's kind of fun. Actually, I think that's what's happening in the picture on the left. Or no, that looks like a video game. Because the third thing you can do is press that big red button in the thigh. And there's a video game controller in my arm, and you can play Donkey Kong on my chest. Kids like to stand there and play video games. And if they're mean kids, because when you're in a costume, have not suited up with something that covers your head like a penguin suit, children are mean and they will punch you. And so if you are a mean little kid and you want to play Donkey Kong on me, I'm going to start doing this. It's advanced mode. This is a project. I said I'd tell you what that little blue filter is for in the Pi Noir. So it is infra blue. It is using that filter to show you infrared plus not blue. The purpose of which is that it shows photosynthesis. And so they can take the same series of pictures in an area over time and show where the photosynthesis is happening and in what areas may not be as healthy. This is, I'm going to build one of these for Tom so that he quits asking me for a 3D scanner to go with his 3D printer.
Yeah, so somebody wanted to be able to build a 3D scanner. These can be really expensive to get high-resolution 3D scanners. So what he did was he attached a lot of cameras to a lot of Raspberry Pis in an array and wrote them together so that there was controlling software that would take the necessary amount of pictures in order to get a high-quality resolution 3D model. This
particular one in the picture is running on 40 Pis with 40 cameras and a single 60-amp power supply to power them all. The original version, he only used 12. So he says, you can do it, especially if you only want to scan the front of somebody, you don't want a 360. You can do it with far less. They also now have one that uses 100 Pis and 100 cameras, and all the equipment to set that up cost 8,500 euros. I did the math, and the 12 one was only about $1,000. So it's still not a cheap solution, but if you want to go about 3D scanning people, it is totally an option. This is once you have weighed and all of the things for your Pi that you were going to make your Raspberry Pi in your kitchen, you can use the Pi microwave to bake your Raspberry Pi. I don't think you should bake pies in a microwave. I think that's what ovens are for, and yet it's an option. And this was inspired by a Reddit thread titled "Food Items That Should Have QR Codes That Tell the Microwave What to Do." And so that's exactly what he did. That's the Twitter. He built this database that uses the UPC code, and so you scan it, and it says Hot Pocket, and the Pi bakes your Hot Pocket for you, and then it tweets to tell you, "I made you Hot Pocket." And this is the project that I want you to build me. Can you get on this? Yeah. This is the magic mirror, and what it does is use a one-way mirror plus a big flat screen behind it, and this is a pretty fantastically detailed project. Every instruction is online, and so there are of them. People have been building them over and over again. And then you can have it display whatever you want. I really like, hey, handsome. That's a good way to wake up in the morning when you look up in the mirror. And so that's about it. This is a bunch of resources that we've recommended, and I will have all these slides online. If it not at the, you can go to Suehle.fedorapeople.org, and there's a Raspberry folder there, and you can get them all. And that's how to find us, and we are generally friendly and will answer your questions. Do you have any questions?
Do you have any questions?
Did you all have Bojangles for lunch and fall asleep?
Getting the Zigbee for automation, you have a way to drive Zigbee with Raspberry Pi.
You had some Zigbees, didn't you?
Yeah, the Zigbee.
Question.
Sorry. Feedback.
Power you down.
Okay.
Zigbee, Pi. Yes, it works. There's a lot of libraries out there for it, especially if you're buying from someone like Adafruit or SparkFun. Their specific implementations. Linux Zigbee is reasonably well supported, and that's the main thing you need to be able to use. A lot of the guides that are written for Arduino will work just as well for Pi. So yeah, totally works.
Subscribe and save on Pi. I support this idea.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. He suggested, perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek, that he would go through. He has a lot of projects that use Pis, and it would be nice if Amazon had a subscription, and we support this.
Oh, sorry. Also, in a way that I spell my name. R, and then do that at SUEHLD. That's my last name.
All right.
Or you can email me and I'll send you the link.
So for the video, the
website.
website is rsuehle.fedorapeople.org, and that's her website. And there's lots of good talks there, including this one.
I just feel like
Score. So what he said is that if you have the lovely program, which includes the ad and the code for the free O'Reilly book, our book is one of the free books you can get. Get our book. And if you have a book with you and you want us to sign it, we'll sign it. Unfortunately, we don't have any books to give away, but if you have one already, we'll be happy to sign it for you. Thank you.
Your customers rely on your website or application. If it's slow or non-responsive, it infuriates your users and costs you money. Keeping your business-critical systems humming along requires insight into what they're doing. Your system metrics tell stories that can reveal performance bottlenecks, resource limitations, and other problems. But how do you keep an eye on all of your system's performance metrics in real time and record this data for later analysis? Enter Longview, the new way to see what's really going on under the hood. The Longview dashboard lets you visualize the status of all your systems, providing you with a bird's-eye view of your entire fleet. You can sort by CPU, memory, swap, processes load, and network usage. Click a specific system to access its individual dashboard, then click and drag to zoom in on choke points and get more detail. Comprehensive network data, including inbound and outbound traffic, is available on the Network tab, and Disk Writes and Free Space on the Disks tab, while the Process Explorer displays usage statistics for individual processes. The System Info tab shows listening services, active connections, and available updates. Adding Longview to a system is easy. Just click the button, copy the one-line installation command, then run the command on your Linux system to complete the process. The agent will begin collecting data and sending it to Longview. Then the graphs start rolling. Use Longview to gain visibility into your servers, so when your website or app heats up, it stays up.
Citrix Zen Server gives you everything you need to integrate, manage, and automate a virtual data center, all on an enterprise-class, cloud-proven virtual platform, and at a third of the cost of other solutions. But why even bother with virtualizing your server infrastructure in the first place? Well, let's say you have a traditional one server to one application architecture, but you're running out of resources and performance is suffering. Once you order new server hardware, you'll wait for delivery. Configure it, install your business application, stage and test the server, and finally, add it to your production farm. If you've been through this process before, you know it can take weeks or even months. You also know it's a manually intensive process that will burden your team every time you outgrow your current setup. With a virtual server solution, you could accomplish all of that in less than half a day. Server virtualization software separates the OS and application from the underlying server hardware. And with multiple virtual machines on a single server, you can use each of them to run different OSs and applications. This makes it possible to move your virtual machines from one piece of hardware to another whenever you want, to maximize utilization, simplify maintenance, or recover from a hardware failure, and without slowing down your applications or users. Clearly, server virtualization provides big benefits, and Citrix Zen Server provides even more. Since it's built on an open platform, Zen Server plays well with your existing hardware, storage systems, and IT management software, as well as with the industry's leading cloud service providers. Best of all, you can get started by downloading a fully functional, production-ready version of Zen Server for free. After a 10-minute installation process, you'll see how easy it is to start virtualizing your workloads and automating your IT management processes. And when you're ready for a richer set of management tools, just upgrade to one of the premium editions of Zen Server. So whether you're interested in virtualizing servers for the first time, expanding your server virtualization footprint, or moving server workloads to the cloud, download and install Zen Server today and see how it can help you simplify your IT environment. Citrix Zen Server. Do more. Don't spend more.